Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to the Aspen Institute in Romania for putting this Aspen Dialogue Series together and inviting me to moderate this webinar. My name is Andrew Wrobel, and I am the founding partner at Emerging Europe, a London-based intelligence and community and news platform whose mission is to foster social and economic and democratic growth of Central and Eastern Europe in a sustainable way. My guests today are Ambassador Baiba Braže, Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and Maroš Šefčovič, Vice President for Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight at the European Commission. Welcome to the Aspen Institute Dialogue Series. I hope you can hear me and we can already start. Fantastic. So I think that Bill Gates' quote from about 5 years ago about the world not being prepared for a pandemic like that has recently been repeated plenty of times. But of course, we cannot turn back time. And what we can do going forward is to learn our lessons and increase our resilience and foresight in as many areas as possible. And this is what I would like to focus on today in today's discussion. But before we start, I would like to invite both my guests to deliver opening remarks. And I will start with Ambassador Braže. The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And many thanks to the Aspen Institute Romania and the GMF office in Bucharest for inviting me to take part in this webinar. It's great to see the Vice President of the Commission with us. Let me start by thanking our host. Romania plays such an important role in NATO. It's such a trusted NATO ally. It makes essential contributions to our collective security. Even in the current COVID crisis, Romanian military has been able to provide military personnel and help save lives at home and abroad, including in Italy, in the US, in Moldova, and so have done many allies. So I'm very glad that it has been possible. I'm also very glad to be able to share this digital platform with all of you, and especially with one of our closest counterparts, the Vice President of the European Commission, Ambassador Šefčovič. The EU is a unique and essential partner for NATO, and the current crisis has further reinforced the importance of our cooperation and partnership. So the issue of resilience now and in the future, obviously, is certainly an important subject and part of very important debate. So the pandemic is teaching us the hard way that we need to make our institutions, our nations, our societies more resistant to threats and attacks. We need to ensure that they are able to bounce back from a crisis like this and that we are stronger after it. So resilience, in my view, is like a muscle. It needs to be trained to be kept strong. So that's why NATO has been working for many years to strengthen the resilience of our allies. And actually, we did it long before the outbreak of the COVID-19. As you know, Article 3 of NATO's founding treaty clearly states that resilience is part of responsibilities of NATO allies. So it's our duty to make sure that societies are resilient. Back in 1949, it was obviously about being resilient to armed attacks, more specifically. But currently, in current security environment, it requires us to be resilient to a range of hybrid threats and hybrid attacks, and even to health pandemics. So this means we all have to adapt to ensure that our nations and our populations can better resist, can better recover from shocks and from these type of situations. And one way to answer it is to work together. We work together as countries, as institutions, as people, as public and private sector, as military and civilian personnel. Already in 2016, NATO leaders agreed to a set of baseline requirements for national resilience. And that's a term that might sound strange, but what it means, it helps allies to ensure preparedness across the whole of government, including in the health sector. So that even under the most demanding circumstances, we have the continuity of the government, that we have continuity of essential services to the population, that we have civilian support to the military, so that there is a whole of government, whole of society effort. Right now, with this pandemic, our resilience is being tested like never before, in my view. On the one hand, we are doing well. So allies prove they are resilient, they are united in the face of the global challenge. Our nations are cooperating and providing critical supplies to those most in need. So hundreds of tons of medical equipment has been donated and delivered. Allies are sharing medical expertise, spare hospital capacity. Thousands of military medical personnel have been deployed in support of civilian efforts. But on the other hand, it's clear that more work needs to be done to further strengthen resilience of our societies. So we need to better plan for pandemics in the future. So we need to protect our critical infrastructure. We need to improve our business continuity planning. And again, that is a concern for all of us. It's both in the public and in the private sector. We can do better. And that is why when defense ministers of NATO met in April, they agreed a set of recommendations to strengthen our resilience. So that is still further. So we are now bolstering our civil preparedness based on the lessons from the crisis. And we are working even closer with our international partners, countries and organizations. So obviously the EU and the UN are the ones with whom we cooperate the closest. Because ultimately, training only one muscle doesn't make the whole body stronger. Resilience is very much a collective effort. So one area where we need to gather even more is on countering disinformation and propaganda. We are seeing state and non-state actors exploiting the current situation to further their own interests. Potential adversaries are using disinformation to try to sow division, undermine our societies, undermine our democracies. We are also seeing disinformation directly aimed at trust and eroding trust in NATO's troops. For example, in April, a fake letter was sent in the Secretary General's name, claiming that NATO would withdraw its troops from Lithuania. There have also been stories about COVID-19 in NATO's battle group in Latvia, about the US forces in Poland. I want to say none of this is true. And this just shows the importance of continued vigilance. So at NATO, we are monitoring disinformation and propaganda campaigns. We are countering false narratives with facts, with our values, with our concrete actions. And that all demonstrates NATO's readiness and solidarity. NATO continues to work with all allies and partners to identify, expose, and counter disinformation. That's what we will do also in the future. We work closely with the EU on this issue. And in my new position as a head of public diplomacy division at NATO, I intend to continue and strengthen this cooperation with the EU institutions, especially when it comes to countering disinformation. So no one really was able to foresee this pandemic, and no one can foresee the next crisis. So increased situational awareness is something that helps us to see what is ahead, and we have to strengthen it. But for crises that nobody can foresee, we have to be agile, flexible, prepared for the unexpected. That is what NATO strives to be, and that is how we build resilience. So, Andrew, Commissioner, I will stop here and look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Vice President, the floor is yours. I think you are muted. Yes.
So now it's better? You can hear me.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. First and foremost, good afternoon to everyone. And I really would like to thank the Aspen Institute in Romania, the German Marshall Fund, for organizing this event and for inviting me to share the thoughts with this distinguished audience. And as I have seen quite a few participants, at first I really would like to sincerely congratulate to Ambassador Baiba Braže to her very high-level position in the NATO, and I also would like to congratulate to my very good friend Mircea Joanna for his appointment to be Deputy Secretary General of NATO, because we are going back for many years, and I still remember that it was Mircea who actually invited me and welcomed me for the first time in Aspen Institute to Romania. So it's nice to be in such a great company, and of course to discuss a very important topic of resilience, foresight, and of course how to cope with the current crisis. I very much appreciate the words of Ambassador Braže about the importance of the cooperation between the EU and NATO. We are actually thinking the same, because many of the aspects we will be dealing with, I believe that our two organizations and institutions could be very much complementary, not only on tackling the disinformation, to which I will come in a moment, but also in comparing our concepts of resilience. We are, of course, going to invest a lot of efforts, and as I said in a second, quite a lot of money in making sure that our member states, our economies, and the whole European Union would be much more resilient and better prepared, not only for future crises, but for the challenges of the 21st centuries. If we look back into of this last few months and just try to draw the first lessons from the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, of course, the first conclusions are very obvious. This is most probably the biggest shock which hit our people, our country since Second World War. It has a dramatic impact on our economy, on our lifestyle, on our society, and also on the way how we govern in all countries around the world. I mean, when I was looking through the different analyses and articles, I think that political scientists are agreeing on one thing, that the COVID was something like the accelerator of the challenges and trends which been already with us, but now we see them in much bigger vividity, in much more striking colors, and they require much more urgent action than we just thought couple of weeks ago. Let's not forget that all the drama started sometime late January, early February, and now we are still even before the summer. So that was the dramatic period of time in which so many things have changed. This crisis brought the things which have been dramatically negative, but there have been also some positive elements. I think that on the one hand, we have seen that this twin digital and green transition is clearly being accelerated by this crisis. That people realize that that the sky is bluer, that the trees are greener, that the air is cleaner, and that simply that we can also have a different style of life as we had before. We never relied so much on the digital communication like right now, and I think all of us went through some kind of crash course in being able to use Zoom, Skype, and all these technologies, which many of us didn't use so often before. And I think it will change the way how we cooperate, how we communicate, and I think how we travel, because I'm sure that a lot of possibilities provided by the digital means of communication would replace a lot of travel. At the same time, I think that also, especially in many parts of Europe, the trust in public institutions was reinvigorated, because I think that despite the initial drama and enormous human cost, I think that our societies proved that we prefer transparency. We want to know what is happening, and we know how to deal with the crisis. And I also would underline the fact that what in the end will prevail over this virus would be this sense of collective responsibility and solidarity to each other, and not only people to people, but as I will explain in a second, also countries to countries, and I would say the continents to continents as well. On the other hand, of course, there is a clear need, as Ambassador Braže just mentioned, need to learn and integrate the lessons from the crisis. I think that for us in Europe, it means that we need to dramatically strengthen the European strategic autonomy in key areas, especially in the face of rising geopolitical and trade tensions. We also have seen that also this crisis was used for organizing some further attacks on multilateralism and international institutions. And there is also a lot of pressure which is being put on our democracies, by the way, as it was very well explained by Baiba, and this is the disinformation and a spread of fake news. So I think that to overcome the crisis and to respond to this really new and changing world, it would be vital that we would carry out honest assessment on our shortcomings, what has worked, what didn't, and what we need to change. And I think that we have to do our utmost to transform our vulnerabilities into the opportunities, and that would be the task of this European Commission, to make sure that we would emerge from the recovery, from this recovery period with more resilient union. How I want to achieve that? I think that we sent very clear signals just this Wednesday, because we presented very ambitious and I would say far-reaching and transformative recovery package. We presented it as a next generation EU, because we know that now we have to lay the founding stone for the EU, for the next generation, for the EU, which should be well prepared for this new post-COVID world and economy of the 21st century. What we did was to propose the 7 years budget and short-term recovery instrument in the sum of 1.85 trillion of euros, and this comes on top of the loans of 540 billion, which been already agreed by the EU institutions. And we should still bear in mind that quite enormous economic and financial assistance was provided already by the member states in the form of the state aid. So comparing of the level of assistance and investment to the European GDP, I think we are doing our homework. But of course, what would be even most important is how we would invest the money, what would be the project, and how transformative we would be in our investment effort and in our work in the coming months and years. I believe that we can use this opportunity for true leap forward, where we want to make sure that European Union would remain one of the top 3 economies in this world, not only in this decade, but in the post-2030 world as well. We want to remain key global actor, which would continue to be responsible to the environment, which should be the union with a strong social values and working social models. And we, of course, want to remain to be the strong advocate of multilateral order and rules-based system, because I believe that our world, especially the 21st century, really need all these ingredients. If it comes to, I would say, more concrete homework here in Europe, I was already talking about the growth based on the green and digital transition, but we are definitely going to pay much more attention to the resilience, so we would be better prepared for the future shocks. And I also would like to thank Romania for being the first country to host the strategic stockpile of medical equipment, which we will be funding from the European budget, to make sure that if the crisis of this type would re-emerge, we will be much better prepared if it comes to medical equipment, protective gear, and all the necessary medical supplies, which we didn't have at the beginning of this year at appropriate quantities, and which created a lot of problems at the beginning of the crisis. I think that if I should draw such a quick lesson, it's quite obvious that resilience would become such a strategic compass for the policy making, and we definitely would use this approach to make sure that we will be achieving much more in the area of technological sovereignty, strategic autonomy, and that we would be doing our utmost to boost the transformative resilience of our societies using this 360-degree systemic approach. And I know that for every effort and assessment, you also need a good criteria. So we are working on a number of resilience indicators which we want to introduce into our policy making, and which would also help us to monitor the progress achieved. And I know that this is something what NATO is working on as well. And therefore, I believe that what would be very important in the future, where we can compare the notes, we can exchange the information, how you are progressing with your resilience assessment, with the self-assessment which will be done by the member states, and how we will be proceeding with our managing not only of the twin industrial revolution, but also developing this new resilience concept. On this information, I think we would have a more opportunity to debate it in the upcoming discussion. Here again, this is completely new ball game. At this time, I will just say one figure that we are monitoring this very carefully, and we have seen during this COVID crisis that there are 2,700 articles containing potential disinformation identified daily. So on daily basis, we have almost 3,000 pieces of information which are scaring people, which are misinforming people, and which are very often aimed at weakening our democratic systems in Europe. And that, I think, is the common task where we can cooperate very closely with NATO, with the NGO sectors, and with all those who would like to help us to make sure that our citizens are properly informed. So thank you very much for this possibility to start with opening remarks. I believe that we can continue our discussions after there will be first question posed to Ambassador and myself.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Before we start the Q&A session, I would like to invite all our participants to send us additional questions. Some have already arrived by email, so we're going to echo these as well. So what I would like to start with the discussion with, and both my guests have actually mentioned that idea, is the concept of resilience. So I have a feeling that over the last few months, the concept of resilience has developed, has changed somehow. Could you tell me how you see the concept developing? And I will give floor to both guests who want to answer this question first.
Maroš, you want to go first?
I think ladies first, you know, so
right.
Please.
Yeah, the concept of resilience, you know, first, when you think about it, probably anybody can interpret it in their own way. NATO as organization, as always, has very concrete parameters. How does it benefit our collective mission, both to defend and deter, manage crises, and cooperate with partners, and thus increase the security globally. So that's why there are these 7 baseline parameters that have been drawn up, and that deals both with making sure there is government continuity, there is services continuity to the population, that our health services are able to deal with health crises, that there are communication networks that are resilient. So those are, you know, very substantive parameters, and through them, with each and every ally, we work together, adapting to their national requirements and circumstances, how to do it the best to benefit their resilience. And EU is very complementary in this respect. What the EU has done through its regulatory and budgetary means and tools does benefit all democracies that are members both of the EU and NATO, but also beyond our partners and friends.
Thank you very much. I can also very well elaborate on what Baiba just said, because we also would like to approach the concept of resilience from this multi-dimensional perspective, because I believe that we have to look at the wider picture, making sure that we would have a proper criteria from the point of view of resilience in the field of sustainability, social aspects of our life, the functioning democracy, and I would say these two aspects which I make the reference just a minute ago, and this is strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty. And I have to also reveal the little secret. When we've been planning our strategic documents the last year and preparing the Commission's work program, what we've been focusing on was how to transform this green and digital twin revolution into the new growth strategy of the European Union, and that was the basic concept. And we expected this would be the pillar upon which we want to modernize the European economy and European society. Of course, after this crisis and the lessons learned, we learned very quickly that we have to add third very important element, and this is actually the resilience of our societies, of our economies, and of our democracies. I mean, to be quite honest, for many of us, it was a big surprise where we are getting from the basic medicaments like paracetamol. We learned that the global value chains probably been developed in a way that they're a little bit too long, that we are somehow missing the key parts for some production of the strategic materials in Europe. And as you know, I was dealing before that with energy security, and it reminded me a little bit how important it was to diversify the sources of supply. And I think that this is the lessons which we can also use in the current crisis, when we would be mapping our vulnerabilities, when we will be looking what to do with the global value chains, which needs to be, let's say, more diversified, which needs to be shortened, or where we would have to reshore some of the production of the key products, like, for example, medicaments or medical appliances here in Europe, just to be sure that in whatever circumstances our citizens would be well taken care of. We see how the new raw materials are becoming as critical as the gas and oil was, let's say, 10 years ago, and more we are leaning towards greener Europe. More we discover that for wind power, for solar power, for smart network, you simply need the raw materials which are all coming from Asia, from Africa, and therefore we are preparing this new raw materials strategy, because we see how it becomes strategically important, not only for our green, but also for our digital transition. So these are, I would say, the lessons learned from these few weeks and months, and therefore we would need to be much more strong in that aspect. 2 years ago, I proposed that we should in Europe establish European Battery Alliance, and then the reason for that was that I clearly have seen that with our developments toward smarter, cleaner mobility, we have more and more of the electric scooters, almost all electric buses, and more and more electric bicycles, again coming from Asia, mostly from China. You have more and more personal cars which are electric, which have been very much preferred option for many municipalities, for airports, coming from the destination. So it was quite obvious that if Europe wants to continue to produce best cars in the world, in this case, they will have to be clean cars. We have to go gradually to more battery, electric, hybrid type of personal vehicles, and that we need to be well prepared for it. What did we discover? We discovered that we almost do not manufacture the batteries in Europe. And I'm very glad that I managed to convince my colleagues in the Commission especially our competition Commissioner Margaret Vestager was a great ally, because we clearly realized that this is kind of a market error, that we simply cannot be almost 100% reliable on batteries coming from outside, because we need them for cars, we need them for buses, we need them for bicycles, we need them for power plants. And we invested a lot in creating this new value chain in Europe, and I'm glad to say that just within 2 years, we managed to channel more than 100 billion of investments, and now we have very strong ecosystem which will guarantee the autonomy of Europe in this very important segment. And I'm mentioning this example not only because I know it well, but because this is the proof that within 2 years you can completely change the game. So we just need to have a good priorities. We need to really focus our minds on what is important, what is necessary, get the support from the industry, get the support for the key political actors and from the society, and you can achieve the change and the transformation. And therefore, I think now the task ahead of us would be, what are the sectors, what are the areas where we need to be so strong in the coming years and months, and to use the same vigor, same energy, I would say the same blueprint, how to overcome the shortcomings which we discovered over the last few weeks. Thank you.
So we have seen that quite a few things have sped up actually recently. But when I was talking about the concept, I was also thinking about how to communicate it to the general public, because we are speaking about the concept of resilience on a sort of high level, but how to communicate, how to prepare all the citizens, or all our citizens, to understand what resilience means. It's an open question.
I think what we have seen from the crisis, and one of the lessons learned will be that societies have become much more resilient, and there is much more participation of the civil society, of media, of trusted information sources, of independent various groups in the whole effort. So, for example, private businesses have been in the forefront to create various innovative solutions of both informing citizens about the current situation, or even designing new apps through a variety of means, of producing new types of medical equipment that startups have done. So there are, I think it has given much more participation to the whole of society in the feelings that this is our very joint effort. And again, here, maintaining that feeling and maintaining the ability to participate in the joint effort, I think, is what makes our society stronger and thus more resilient. Of course, as for NATO, quite clearly, we had to continue to be providing the defense and deterrence, and we were able to do that throughout the crisis. So all the stories about, all types of NATO's weaknesses actually didn't prove to be true. And we have been able also to show that we can deliver during the crisis. So military planes were flying to help the civilian hospitals. The military was providing equipment, military personnel and medics were providing very practical help to a variety of places. The logisticians, military logisticians, were helping to build civilian hospitals. So there has been also this genuine engagement between civilian and military sectors within all countries. Vice
President?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think it's very important, and also the way how you put it, because the resilience clearly will be the buzzword and priority for many years to come. And what we in the EU are doing right now is that we want to put, I would say, the concrete number and concrete content behind the concept of resilience. So I would say the biggest part of this new financial instrument which we proposed on Wednesday is called actually Recovery and Resilience Facility, and we are going to channel through this facility 560 billion euros, which is a lot of money. And of course, we want to make sure that we'll be working very closely with our member states, so they would prepare the recovery plans, and it would be kind of self-assessment as a NATO is doing. So if we are talking about, I would say, the most sensitive issue right now, which was the health sector. So I think that big part of this money will go to support the reform of the health sectors in our member states. What are the lessons learned? What did we miss? Do we have hospitals ready? Do we have medical personnel properly trained? Do we have the equipment we need for this type of pandemics? And we would like to hear from the member states what are their plans, what they want to do. We would give them the best possible advice, and then we would be ready to fund such reforms in the member states. And this would go, of course, in all other areas which I mentioned before, the proper training for the new skills which would be required on labor market. I mean, all that lessons learned for making sure that in economy, in industry, we will be much more self-sufficient than before. I think that we should take this topic as one of the theme for the discussion in the Conference on Future of Europe, which we are hopefully being opening in the autumn of this year, because I'm sure that this crisis brought a lot of issues, a lot of question marks, which citizens would like to discuss with the policy makers. And on my behalf, I can tell you that our first ever annual foresight report will be very much focused exactly on the concept of resilience and how we want to develop it in the European Union.
So at the beginning in your opening speeches, you both mentioned disinformation, and I would like to devote some time of our discussion to that topic. So there's a few different things here. On the one hand, we have plenty of different conspiracy theories. After the outbreak of the pandemic, there was a huge explosion of those. At the same time, we have governments and telling journalists to report only what is being said during official press conferences, forbidding them from speaking to medical personnel. Yet another problem is where we see governments saying that the word coronavirus should be entirely banned. For example, the Brazilian president said that coronavirus is actually a fantasy. We of course have the issue of non-state actors and all the influence operations. So if we look at an individual person who actually gets their information, their news from a Facebook feed, they're overwhelmed with this mix of information. How to educate them? We were talking also about the 2,700 wrong news that we are able to identify on a daily basis. How can a person who wants to learn what the situation is like actually learn that? That's a very long and complex question, I know.
If I may, I think that type of effort, we have to look at it at the systemic level. We are all democracies, so we are all committed to free media, independent media, and there are various both legal and practical instruments how to ensure that media has all these rights, but also obligations. And systemically, both for the NATO and I also suggest for the EU, it's in our interests that the quality media and in this quality independent free media has a very strong role in our societies, that it does provide, especially in the times of crisis, this reliable information to our citizens. From what we have seen, the crisis has been a difficult time for the media. So it clearly shows that the media landscape can actually, the ownership and the circulation, everything can change. So there will be some changes, and it will be up to the governments to see whether they can support this variety of media landscape and continue its existence. From other hand, obviously, it's again within the government's hands to think how we can ensure that our citizens are able and willing to understand what is hostile information coming to them, what are conspiracy theories, how to check them. And it's also for the NATO and for the governments, when they see this information, to immediately call it out and counter it with facts. So I would say these three pillars, both having free, independent media that provides quality information, having citizens who understand that they are challenged and that there are threats out there, and they are able and willing to sort out what to do about it. And then, of course, when there is disinformation, when there is propaganda, and there are challenges by external actors or adversaries, that there is organizations and governments that call it out right away and tell what it is.
Yeah, and I just would add a couple of more elements. I think what is very important in this type of crisis is also the personal example of the leaders, of the politicians, how they behave during the crisis, how they can convince the populations to be responsible, to respect the rules, and to minimize the exposure, in this case, to pandemic. And I think this is irreplaceable. Simply responsible behavior of the political leaders is always the key element how to tackle any crisis. Second, I would say such a systemic issue is very much linked with the rule of law. We have seen that almost in every member state, definitely in the EU, but I would say it was such a global phenomenon that the government introduced or enacted emergency laws. And here again, very much depends on the political leadership, how you handle the situation, how much you used your powers, how did you navigate even in this difficult situation and stayed within the democratic boundaries. And this is something what we are currently assessing also on the EU level, and it would be the subject of such assessment for all EU member states, which we want to present in the autumn. But one thing which we want to do earlier, and we planned it for June, and it was exactly spurred by this unbelievable wave of disinformation. This is the EU action plan against disinformation, which we want to adopt already most probably in July. So we are accelerating our efforts here because again, there is a lot of things to learn from the crisis. In some aspect, that agreement, that understanding, that code of practice on disinformation, which we agreed upon with a key social media platform till certain extent level worked quite well. But we see that there is still a lot to be done, and that line between the proper information and censorship is very, very fine. So that would be very delicate balance to find, where we again have to also rely a lot on the responsibility of this social media platform, what kind of information would be spread, and how can we actually approach this huge topic with our clear democratic priorities, like the freedom of speech, freedom of information, but at the same time we'll be fighting disinformation. We've been faced with this phenomenon in the EU, and I think in NATO it's the same already for quite some time. We started to address it in more systemic way already in 2015 when we established the first East Stratcom task force, and then it was developed into the current rapid alert system and different platforms. But still, I think that would be the room for cooperation, for sharing the practices, and I would say also for making this disinformation analytics more available to our citizens, because we know that this information exists. We know that this analysis is available. We know that we put it online. But I'm sure that a huge and overwhelming majority of our citizens is still not aware that there is such a website, that there is such a link where you can check if some of this most frequent and more present hoax from the social media platform are properly analyzed and discredited. And I think that here we would need to find a way how to reach out to more citizens just with the information. If you have a doubt or if it sounds strange, there is a web link, there is a possibility to do some fact checking, and that there are actually a lot of very bright people who did it for you, so you would be properly informed. And the last point, I totally subscribe to what Baiba just said. We have to invest a lot in a young generation, actually from the age where they are starting to be active on the social media platform, to be aware that not everything what is there is true, that a lot of posts try to manipulate them, just to be a little bit, let's say, more mature to be on this platform and to be able to distinguish the real information from the fake news, to be simply more vigilant about the information which is brought to them by this social media. So it would be, again, such a huge societal task.
So I will relate to my previous question, and we actually got a question from one of the participants. So the question is, what kind of actions are planned, if they are planned, against I won't name the news channel, but news channels that constantly spread fake news, and we know there are quite a few of those. Does NATO or the European Commission plan any action against such media outlets?
I will ask Maroš to go first with regard to the actions against media channels.
Yeah, this is, I think, of course, one of that very sensitive issue where you still want the media to be true, to be objective, and at the same time you do not want to create some kind of European or global censorship. So this is, I would say, the fine line we have to find, and we have to work on. I think that what should be the first steps is that I think the issue of the social media platform is very, very crucial, and I think we are still looking for the way, what would be the best way to regulate. We've been working through the, let's say, voluntary code of conduct. Now it's a question to assess if it was enough or if we need to do something more. If it comes to media as such, there is already quite developed legislations and the responsibility of publishers and so on and so forth. But again, I think in this fast running world, the question is, how long it takes very often for the legal remedies or to kick in to correct the informations which are not true or which could be harmful. So all this, I think, would need to be subject to the further assessment, and we want to tackle it in our European Democracy Action Plan, where, of course, this would be one of the very sensitive topics where I think we need to find the right approach, how to deal with also those who are deliberately misleading and disinforming the citizens. We do not want to suppress the variety of options or freedom of expressions or the democratic discussions, but we would need to find more efficient tools to tackle disinformation, lies, and harmful content. And that would be, I think, the challenge which would be ahead of both of us.
Ambassador?
I think I can only agree to what Maroš has said with regard, that there are instruments and there are means how to deal in our democratic countries with those actors that violate these laws. So the regulators, obviously, we have regulators in each and every country, and if they see that there are violations of the rules and laws that regards the free speech and provision of information, they can deal with it as a first step. And there is, of course, further steps that can be done with regard to at the European level and so on and so forth. But we have to separate, certainly. There are attacks, targeted attacks by external actors. So it's not just disinformation per se. Those are targeted attacks and they are part of subversive operations. And they have been around for a long time. They have changed, developed, and those tools involve a variety of expressions. You can see the growth of cyber attacks and all types of cyber activities during the crisis that suddenly they're much more active. So hack to leak and hack to steal and everything around that really grew. So the hybrid threats are not just, that's why they are called hybrids. They have a variety of expressions. And these targeted attacks, we have to be very aware at the government level, at the military, at our security service levels that they will continue. They're going to change the shape and the form, but they are not going to disappear. And this is where we have to very straightforwardly call out and say, this is, we know what is going on, and this is cyber attack or disinformation, and warn our citizens that this is what is happening. An entirely different level are various conspiracy theories, misperceptions, different ways of expressing oneself's opinions. And that is part of the space which is called freedom of speech. And there, unless we see really hostile behavior, is very difficult to counter it. And there really is the onus of responsibility goes to reliable media, quality independent media that has to take a lot of responsibility on itself to investigate and to tell those stories. A lot goes on the consumer groups, on the civil society, and of course also to the education sector where we as democratic countries do have to tell our children and not only children, the whole society, that this is what is happening, and have to ask for a critical view on that. So, but that is a different type of activity, obviously.
Now, if you allow just two more points, I think Baiba led me to it. I mean, I think the last European election been actually the first occasion where we as a EU had to adopt a set of measures to make sure that the European Parliament elections, would be free, would be without any interference through this, I would say, hybrid means, and they had to develop quite elaborate system of cooperation with different internet platforms and to agree with them regular monitoring to make sure that there will be no interference into the process of the European election. I mean, this time we succeeded, but I'm sure that this would be something which would be such an ongoing task for all of us to make sure that we would protect the democratic character of the elections themselves. And then, of course, there is some more even subtle issue, which is again something where we would have to deal more with educating, especially the younger generation of this new world of the social media, where very often through the skillful campaigns you can lock the people in some kind of ideological or political views bubbles, where the news feed to the user of the social media platform is very much filtered by the algorithms, and in worst case by some concrete people who just simply want to influence the behavior of the people, or in the election booth, or I would say in the political life. And this is something which is a completely new area, where I think we are just trying to comprehend what is the scale of the influence of this type of, let's call it openly, manipulation of the opinion. And I think that would be the task of the next generation of politicians, and regulators, how to deal with these new ways, how to impact or influence the election results.
So I have a question regarding independent media, and we as an organization are doing our best to actually empower and educate, especially those independent media outlets, how to deliver the right information. How can we empower altogether, those independent media to learn and deliver that legitimate information and news?
I think, again, as far as NATO is concerned, our duty and obligation is to put out the information that is factual and that doesn't give rise to some type of doubt about what NATO is saying or doing. So I think that is step one, that we work with partners in media, with journalists, with social media, and we provide them what we can, and we are factual about both what we are doing, but also what others are doing to us. When we see disinformation, when we see lies, we call it out, all right? Then at the national level, obviously, what the governments do, that's a different aspect. There are a variety of practices that we have seen. There are governments who have established, for example, special funds where they sort of give money to the sort of media fund, which is then decided by the journalists and academicians themselves to which projects that media does that are investigative media that should be supported. There are regulatory various actions that have been seen. So that's again at the government levels. That is something where probably at the times of the crisis we have to be or we can be quite flexible in how we ensure that the free and independent media continues to work, and especially the smaller ones, the ones in the countryside, the regional media, and so on, which is important for providing that proximity of information to the people outside of the big cities.
Yeah, and I just would add a couple of points. I think what would be the most important, first and foremost, to create the good environment for independent journalism. So I think we have to also bear in mind that also in this let's call it post-COVID period, that these are especially the paper media, the print media, which would go through very difficult economic moments. And I think that this was just spurred that more and more information will be spread among the people through the digital media. Therefore, I think we would have to pay even more attention to the digital platforms. But I think that we have to support the independent media boards. We have to support all those who are involved in investigative journalism. I think that we should boost the capacity of our institutions, but also of independent journalists for fast-checking and I would say rapid reactions. So we see that there is a hoax, there is a mystery, there should be some kind of official and also semi-official journalist base level of contacts, which would be able to immediately attack the dangerous hoax and misinformation with the proper information. So I think this would be something upon which we have to focus. And then, of course, the high quality journalism and good journalists, and to provide the support they would require, and to also respect how they want to do it, because from one way we hear that they are in economic distress, from other way they do not want to be helped financially because it could create the perception that we are kind of limiting their freedom and independence. So it's again something which has to be developed closely with the media, with the journalists. But I think that support for creating environment for independent, high quality journalism and helping them with our analytical capacities to fight the disinformation, misinformation and hoax, that probably would be the best recipes. So
my final question for today, we're approaching the end of the session. comes from one of our participants. Has the crisis accelerated the EU-NATO institutional cooperation? If so, how? And what are the lessons learned on how the EU and NATO can work together better?
I can say on our behalf that yes, absolutely. It has never been closer. It's quite incredible to see how closely we work. And I can say that in my field of work, which is both the information and communication services, but I also know it's in other parts of NATO. Both staff-to-staff relationships, there are, weekly coordination, online meetings on a variety of issues, both the topicalities at that moment, but also sharing information. There are also more creative ideas how we can work together in partner countries. It's all there, and especially against these hybrid threats, such as informational operations and attacks against our societies. And what the EU will be doing on military mobility in the next budget, of course, is very important. So we will be watching with interest and great support to the implementation of these projects.
Vice President?
Yeah, I can just echo what Baiba just said, because I think that during this last few weeks and months, we have seen that we could be of enormous help to each other. We have seen the flights being organized to transport the EU citizens back home. We have seen the military flights transporting the medicine. We have seen military hospitals helping the patients from another country, and we have seen that the military doctors and health professionals been helping in hospitals, in field, really tackling the pandemic. So I think that this clearly have shown that both institutions and organizations have a lot to offer, and definitely can achieve much more if they would cooperate very, very closely. And as you know, we in the European Union also realize that what would be expected in the future is that we would be much more robust also in the segment of common defense. We just creating DG Defense, where we also want to see how we can, with the pooled resources, develop better preparedness, and of course to increase the also military capabilities of our member states, who in big parts are also the member states of NATO. So there is a lot of compatibility, and I'm sure that it would be very useful in the future. And then the projects like the infrastructure for the military transport and other projects, I think would be of I would say such a strategic importance in the long run. Currently, what we are discussing, and where I think we really could be the inspirations to each other, this is how we would deal with the issue of resilience. I, with a great interest, heard and studied the approach of the NATO, the 7 criteria, process of self-assessment, possible pilot projects in making sure that the member states would be focusing on the vulnerabilities jointly identified, and this is done from, let's say, military NATO perspective. And of course, we are developing the concept which would be larger, which would concern economy, which would concern the society, sustainability, and of course the quality of our democratic system across the EU. So let's say our dashboard of resilience indicators would be larger, but we also want to work very closely with our member states to develop their recovery plans, to identify the vulnerabilities, and to work together on making sure that they would be much more resilient than in the past. And I think this is joint wish, joint effort, joint priority for the NATO and the EU. And we are currently brainstorming together with our NATO colleagues how to do it better. And I hope that it would be one of the topics for the discussions, where the President of the European Commission would meet with the Secretary General of the NATO, because as you know, Ursula von der Leyen, as a former defense minister, she knows the NATO organization very well, and I'm sure that this will just create further opportunities where we can consider what type of cooperation and what type of complementarity we would like to focus upon.
So despite social distancing, the two organizations are actually working closer together. Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you very much, Vice President. It's been a pleasure to chair this session. I hope the participants have enjoyed it, and so have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Commissioner. Vice President.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ambassador. All the best. Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you.